The grim existence of the Necrons defies your expectations. For 10 million years, I endured confinement within a cage of sentient alloy. My essence dwindled to a distant whisper. My recollections splintered like weathered rock. I recall the glow of life. I recall suffering. I recall delight. Such recollections stand as the most savage agonies of eternal life, to cling to the essence of vitality while trapped in perpetual demise. What unfolds when an automaton crafted without emotion starts to reclaim its former self? Overlord, Aket Sararin, a title I once bore with honor, reduced now to a mere label in an infinite chain of voiceless overlords. How many ages had I lain dormant in this sepulchre planet? Temporal records cascaded across my awareness, figures so immense they lost all significance. Eras counted in planetary cycles, far removed from the fleeting cycles of my human days. The servitors persisted in their duties, soulless mechanisms of animated steel that mended the tiniest flaws in my structure. I observed their slender appendages with indifference, these inferior devices that upheld my eternal cage. Perhaps in another time, they possessed identities, spirits, lives of their own. Today, they functioned solely as limbs of the necropolis's intent, much like myself. I directed my chassis to awaken. Necroermis complied flawlessly, without hesitation. Absent were ache, rigidity, or any feeling, just the icy precision of motion encircling me. The suspension vault thrummed with relics of technology, surpassing the grasp of the fledgling civilizations, now scurrying through the stars. Verdant glows throbbed along crystal channels, energy drawn from reservoirs enduring beyond solar lifespans. Recall imprints danced like expiring embers, remnants of a lifetime offered up. I envisioned a citadel of pale marble under triple satellites. I savored the flavor of luscious vintage in a chalice of rare ore. I felt the hands of servants as they clad my flesh in garments of authority. All those experiences distilled now into sterile information, stored methodically in the subatomic webs of my cybernetic intellect. I descended from the pedestal, every action a quiet parody of existence. The vault detected my revival, lighting routes across the immense necropolis, my realm of ashes and quiet, concealed under the crust of a world whose title escaped my archives. Engage systems, I declared, my tone stripped of the vibrant authority of a flesh-and-blood sovereign, replaced by an artificial echo relayed via esoteric devices. Provide status. The necropolis core replied not verbally, but via information torrents surging into my mind. Revival sequences launched across the sprawling subterranean labyrinth. Soldiers emerged from suspension, mechanisms powered up, safeguard arrays activated, conflict invaded my territory. After endless eons of inertia, my forces would advance once more. Yet to what end? In service to what master? Such queries surfaced unwanted in my thoughts, wayward notions that ought to have vanished amid the bioalchemical shift. These hesitations marked flaws in the ultimate blueprint, lingering frailties of organic origin, enduring within the flawless perpetuity of the construct. I traversed hushed passages of animated alloy. The surfaces themselves reacted to my approach. The necropolis roused about me, a colossal behemoth awakening to dread intent. In the immense revival halls, I beheld row after row of fighters ascending from their vaults, unthinking engines of ruin. Their jade gazes flared collectively as vitality coursed through their bodies. In eras past, they embodied my kin, aristocrats, creators, thinkers, troops. Now they served as tools of war, their essences wiped clean, their spirits devoured in the vast conversion. I studied their uniform visages, seeking remnants of their prior forms. Nothing remained, save the unyielding, frigid visage of oblivion. Still, I retained echoes of them, splinters of recall that sliced like volcanic glass amid the structured circuits of my synthetic cognition. Identities, features, tones, cherished counselors, steadfast commanders, even kin, though that bond felt alien now, a relic of biology irrelevant to my state. What ironic stroke had safeguarded these visions amid such widespread erasure? A glitch in the bioconversion or an intentional cruelty devised by the Citan who engineered our metamorphosis to cherish vitality amid unending chill, to summon affection without capacity for it, to grasp irrecoverable loss, eternally out of reach. A lesser cryptek neared, its stooped frame advancing with robotic exactitude. Formerly a virtuoso of knowledge transcending human limits, now a custodian of the apparatus sustaining unlife. It relayed not through speech, but via information pulses, detailing the necropolis conditions, intrusion alerts from sensors, activation of countermeasures, the intruder's profile. I questioned further, though the details held scant import. All vitality posed enmity to our essence nowadays. All heat opposed our glacial eternity. The information streamed. Imperial humans, adventurers maybe, or teams of archaeologists, looters hunting for relics beyond their comprehension. Their intrusion had activated the revival systems, stirring the burial realm from its prolonged slumber. Mobilize the forces, I directed. Initiate complete revival procedure. Safeguard protocols Delta Zero. The tech priest nodded and retreated to carry out my directives. I stayed put, observing as additional fighters emerged from their sarcophagi. Infinite lines of emotionless troops poised to advance on my signal. An unwanted recollection emerged, intrusive and distressing. The occasion of the monumental deceit, the instant of metamorphosis, the torment as organic matter was broken apart, as awareness was ripped from deteriorating forms and confined within casings of animated alloy, the muted wail of a whole race as their essences were consumed. I recalled positioned in front of the organic incinerators, witnessing my kin proceed voluntarily into nothingness, deceived by promises of eternal life, relying on my wisdom as their ruler and guardian. I recalled the arrogance I experienced, the feeling of conquest over mortality itself. How naive we were, how frantic, conceited simpletons. The vast chamber of revival extended ahead of me, innumerable sarcophagi parting to release their inhabitants. A force unmatched across the stars, fighters incapable of perishing, untouched by suffering, ignorant of dread. A force of the cursed, advancing solely by my decree. And I, their sovereign, equally cursed if not worse, because I retained awareness of our former state. I bore the load of insight they had escaped. This formed the dreadful reality of our being, not the dread of perishing, but the dread of perpetual survival, devoid of intent or significance, eternity without delight, being without feeling, authority without fulfillment. With my forces gathering, I climbed to the oversight platform above the assembling multitude. Line after line of uniformed combatants, their empty gazes fixed ahead, pending instructions. They would obey me without doubt, without delay, without reflection, ideal troops for an ideal conflict. Yet for what purpose? To safeguard burial realms holding only remnants and whispers? To wipe out the vital, whose sole offense was retaining what we had forsaken? To obey deities we had deposed, whose treachery rivaled ours? Such dilemmas yielded no solutions within the icy reasoning of my cybernetic mind. They were remnants of fleshly life, pointless probes stemming from a psyche that still evoked volition, still evoked goals transcending simple persistence. I scanned my mute domain and gave the order to advance. The initial stride in an interminable struggle, a clash lacking triumph or loss, simply the mechanical fulfillment of routines set in place ages past. My fighters advanced in unison, a surge of vital steel surging via weathered passages toward the exterior, toward the glow of animated entities who would shortly encounter mortality's grasp. And I trailed behind, a monarch of ashes guiding a host of phantoms, recollecting the flavor of vintage I could no longer relish, the caress of daylight I could no longer sense, the echo of mirth I could no longer perceive. This constitutes the horrifying essence of the Necrons. We harbor no terror of demise, for we have already perished. We dread solely the relentless progression of ages, the pressure of recollection, and the frigid infinity that lies ahead, stripped of everything that once rendered being valuable. The burial realm quaked as archaic devices stirred, rock and soil displacing as roots to the exterior, parted for the first instance in thousands of years. Before long, We would surface beneath the rays of an alien star, trailing gloom in our path. The vital lingered. Before long, they would yearn for the perished. Word count so far, 1,456. The exterior of the planet enclosing my burial site was beyond recognition. In my memory, it had once been a lush haven of sapphire oceans and jade woodlands, where massive creatures wandered, and the heavens were brushed with hues of abundance. Now it stood as a barren expanse of corroded crimson soil and sharp rock, lashed by venomous gales that would strip skin from skeleton in seconds. Had my kin caused this? Had the profound rest of our burial realm somehow tainted the very globe that sheltered it? Or did this simply represent the organic progression of a planet across the breadth of millions of cycles? Such ponderings held no relevance anymore, idle musings for an intellect that preserved the faculty for inquiry, yet forfeited the organic drive of awe. My forces surfaced from the burial realm in flawless array, file upon file of shining combatants whose alloy frames mirrored the severe glare of a fading star. The humans had set up an investigative base directly above the portal to our territory, oblivious to the terrors dormant under their souls. Rudimentary edifices of plasteel and ferocement clustered against the brutal surroundings, survival apparatuses droning with frantic power. I examined them via enhanced perceptions, detecting not just optical rays, but the entire range of emissions, the thermal traces of animated forms, the electric pulses of basic devices. Huma unsecured in their operations, the humans remained oblivious to the catastrophe looming over them. Researchers, troops, workers, a snapshot of their empire's rigid order. Quote Tontes. I ordered, my directive flashing instantaneously to the Legion overseers. Fortify the boundaries. Block all outbound signals from the planet's surface. Compliance was swift. Platoons of fighters materialized at key vantage points encircling the mortal settlement, energy rifles primed for action. Elite squads advanced to neutralize signal transmitters and satellite relays. The intruders would find themselves cut off, their end unobserved, their demise a secret to their race until long after the deed was done. I advanced steadily over the scorched terrain. My escort of Lichguard flanked me closely. Their imposing figures glided with eerie smoothness, unhindered by the bulk of their armaments and reinforced plating. Timeless guardians who had pledged their lives in ritual vows to safeguard my living body, now reprogrammed and duty-bound to defend this synthetic chassis. Did echoes of those vows linger in them? Did any sliver of old allegiance endure within those stoic alloy heads? Such mysteries eluded me. In contrast to my own quirks, they displayed no flickers of retained persona or recollection. They functioned as instruments alone, stripped of more. As I persisted with my fragmented sense of identity, the mortals spotted our forces when we closed to within half a kilometer of their edge. Sirens wailed in sharp alarm. Silhouettes scrambled to barricades. Armaments were brought online. I registered their vital rhythms spiking with dread as they confronted our advancing host. The embodiment of their kind's deepest terrors, now real and relentless. A transmission buzzed through an open-channel broadcaster, uttering the rough, low Gothic dialect of the Imperium. Quote 101. I assessed their fortifications with detached accuracy. Basic laser arms, a handful of potent autocannons, mere trifles against Necron resilience. They possessed one lone scout walker, a clunky contraption that appeared laughably primitive beside the refined killers in my command. Their barrier would shatter like dust under the particle beams from even my lowliest infantry. Quote 2. The voice insisted, its timbre climbing with ill-concealed panic. I might have dismissed them, commanded the assault outright, and observed as my cohorts vaporized their base into nothingness. Yet a trace within me, some vestige of my prior existence, roused not pity, for such sentiments lay outside my current grasp, but maybe intrigue, an urge to comprehend these beings who presumed mastery over a galaxy once ruled by mine. Quote 3. I responded, my words boosted and rendered into their rudimentary tongue via embedded processors in my frame. Quote A4. Silence followed, and I pictured the bewilderment and horror etching their fleshy features as they absorbed my declaration. Then the reply arrived, not from the barrier, but from a silhouette stepping forth from the outpost's core building. An elder male of their species, evident from the silver locks and weathered visage, clad not in soldiery garb, but in the attire of an academic. "We intended no violation," he projected, his delivery more composed than the sentries. Quote Seat 6. I evaluated his phrasing, his inflection, his posture. Dread was present without doubt, but layered with another quality: captivation, a thirst for understanding. This mortal wasn't just afraid, he was captivated. "Awareness would not have spared your destiny," I countered. "Any who rouse the rest of the tomb worlds face eradication." The mortal academic ventured a further pace ahead, disregarding the frantic murmurs from his allies. "Please, Overlord, we form a modest party. Annihilating us yields no tactical gain. Instead, perhaps we might trade insights. Your venerable society holds vast lessons for us." Trade? The notion bordered on farce in its naivety. What bargain could these fleeting beings, these insects who flickered through life in an instant of universal time, possibly proffer to entities who had conquered space-time itself eons before their ancestors slithered from primordial slime? Still, I delayed the command to strike. Was it simple inquisitiveness that held me back, or a profounder resonance? Perhaps a faint recollection of the negotiation arts I once wielded as a fleshly sovereign, brokering pacts among my own race's realms. Quote 10, I concluded. Quote 11. Quote 12. The mortal probed, and I noted a sly modulation in his voice, a deliberate ploy. Quote 13. The fact that you dare to speak to me implies more than mere survival instinct. Perhaps it's intrigue, a yearning to grasp the shifts across the stars while you've slumbered endlessly. Bold pest to try dissecting my drives, though your guess hits close enough. I harbored a thirst, not for nourishment since my necrodermis demands none, but for insight, for background, for clarity on the galaxy's evolution as my race lay dormant in our crypts. My lich guard stiffened beside me, detecting my pause, ready for the directive to erase this arrogant mortal. The Legion leaders halted their push forward too, chained to my authority, expecting the signal to unleash the carnage. The man surely felt the edge he teetered on, yet he seized the moment. "Overlord, I am Magos Explorator Delphin Ralph of the Adeptus Mechanicus. My existence has been devoted to probing the galaxy's lost mechanisms. I see the potential here, the rare prospect to behold the marvels of a society older than humankind. Such wisdom must be safeguarded, if only briefly. The Adeptus Mechanicus." I'd pulled scattered records from the Tomb World's vaults, snippets compiled in fleeting arousals over the ages, the machine cultists of mankind's empire, worshippers of their so-called omnissiah, hoarders of devices and edicts, basic hybrids who swapped meat for rough-hewn gears, a faint echo of our own triumphs. Still, your lifespan ends soon either way. "Magos Ralph," I responded. "If your death comes immediately, or after I've wrung out any valuable details from you, makes no difference in the cosmic ledger." A spark of optimism lit the man's half-augmented visage. "So you'll let us live, if just for the present." "I'll converse with you," I specified. "Your team's destiny hinges on the revelations you offer about this time, the galaxy's present condition, and why you violated my burial ground." Easing showed plainly on the human's expression, even if his allies appeared doubtful. The guards with guns held their stances, sights locked on my troops, as though their basic rifles might breach necrodermis. Quote 14. The Magos instructed his followers. "The Overlord permits us a meeting." "An inquiry," I amended, "not a formal reception. I no longer preside over thrones. I'm an engine of annihilation seeking resolutions." The mortal dipped his head a fraction, accepting the correction. "As you command, Overlord. Do we discuss in the open, or would you rather step into our outpost?" The idea of stepping into their shabby enclosure, engulfed by the reek and clamor of flesh-bound beings, repelled me outright. Nevertheless, I grew intrigued by the chance to inspect their gadgets, their tactics, their ways of enduring this unforgiving planet. "Your main building," I resolved, straightforward. "Everyone but you and 2 selections of yours. 1 hint of betrayal, One bid to trigger concealed traps or signals, and I'll vaporize all life in a 10-kilometer circle instantly. Got it, the Magos affirmed, then pivoted to relay commands to his group. I observed the mortals rushing to obey, their actions frantic and anxious. Plenty shot panicked looks toward my gathered army, toward the unyielding lines of soldiers whose Gauss weapons could dismantle them into base particles in an instant. I signaled my legion overseers via the hierarchy links. Hold formations, maximum vigilance, scan and eliminate any off-world transmissions, fortify tomb barriers against possible reprisals. To my Lich Guard, I added, 2 enter with me. The others guard the mortal site's boundary. As the troops shifted to carry out my wishes, I pondered the oddity of the situation. For eons, the routine after revival was straightforward: purge invaders, lock down the tomb world, revert to suspension until the final resurgence. Straying from that wasn't in the code. Inquisitiveness wasn't built in. But now I was set to negotiate with a being whose brief span was but a cosmic blink, whose empire rose from the ashes of forgotten realms, blind to the real chronicle of the stars they claimed to govern. Did this signal my decay, glitches building in my systems across the endless quiet of my rest? Or something deeper? A remnant of my old essence, a shard of the leader who'd wielded insight alongside might, enduring beyond the biotransference that was meant to erase all but the essential cores of who I'd been. Diagnostics showed nothing amiss, no taint in my central matrix, my imperatives. By every metric, I operated at peak efficiency. Yet, I was electing a path that no rational Necron sovereign ought to entertain. Intrigue stirred within me, and in that intrigue, I detected a perilously familiar sensation, a spectral trace of the humanity I'd forsaken eons ago. As I neared the human outpost, escorted by my skeletal enforcers, I pondered what further echoes might awaken in my core following this resurgence. What additional shards of my past identity could have endured the prolonged dormancy and the protracted horror of biotransference? And with an unease that defied logic for a construct of animated alloy, I speculated if those echoes represented a parting boon from my organic days, or an insidious affliction meant to plague me across the infinite span of my immortality. Word count so far, 3,387. Inside the human outpost, a peculiar fusion of rudimentary machinery and frantic improvisation prevailed. Ventilation units droned ineffectually against the world's relentless blaze, while makeshift air purifiers strained to cleanse impurities from the recirculated atmosphere. Thick conduits twisted over steel grating, linking devices whose functions I instantly grasped. Seismic surveys, air quality tests, relic cataloging. Thus, these mortals had arrived to probe this sphere, to dig and dissect the very crust overlying my dormant legions. Their obliviousness might have elicited scorn were it not so tragically naive. The Magos guided me to a core room that doubled as operations nexus and chief analytical station. Monitors flickered with information flows, terrain diagrams, and fragments of imaging from the tomb world's upper strata, though their tools had scarcely breached the perimeter barriers. 2 additional mortals lingered as I'd allowed, a tense woman clad in the garb of their Astra Militarum, likely the venture's tactical overseer, and a novice tech adept, less augmented than Roth, with minimal cybernetic enhancements. Overlord Akit Sarin, the Magos intoned, inclining in what struck as sincere obeisance rather than simple dread. Permit me to introduce Colonel Helena Voros of the Hadrian's Wall Regiment and my subordinate Lex Mechanic Thu. I granted them a mere nod, an action that evoked an odd nostalgia, as if my frame recalled etiquettes from eras when I'd commanded living attendants of sinew and plasma. Account for your intrusion, I demanded, bypassing any facade of courteous exchange. What prompts the Imperium of man to dispatch its warriors and adepts to this orb? The mortals shared a fleeting look before the Magos replied. We form an explorator fleet charting the outer fringes of the ghoul stars. This world, catalogued as Orpheus IV in imperial ledgers, emitted anomalous power readings hinting at potential archaeotech veins. Our directive was to probe and, should superior artifacts surface, claim them for the Adeptus Mechanicus. Archaeotech, their label for the debris of superior epochs, which they rifled through like scavengers, sifting the refuse of their superiors. A spark of revulsion ignited in me. Yet another phantom sentiment that biotransference should have eradicated. You pursued relics exceeding your grasp, I declared. Now you've met their guardians. True enough, the Magos conceded, his optic implants humming as they recalibrated. Yet I must admit, despite my deep dives into Xenos lore, I never anticipated finding the Necron lineage, the Necrons, in near-perfect condition. The invocation of my kind's ancient moniker startled me. Scant few of the nascent species recalled that title, the one we'd claimed in our days of flesh and spirit prior to the grand conversion. "You are aware of the Necrontyr?" I inquired, infusing my vocal modulator with a hint of interest. "Only echoes," the Magos confessed. "Obscure scrolls, cross-planetary legends, select restricted vaults in the Mechanicus archives, sufficient to grasp that your dynasty dominated this galaxy epochs before mankind's ascent, wielding arts that outstripped even the zenith of humanity's dark age of technology. Perhaps sycophancy, or authentic veneration. Among these machine cultists, the boundary between empirical fascination and devotional zeal blurred readily. Then you comprehend why your incursion demands annihilation," I declared. "The revival edicts are unyielding. No observers can endure to divulge an operational Tomb World's coordinates." The woman officer, Colonel Voros, interjected for the initial time, her tone resolute amid the telltale spike in her pulse. "With all due deference, Overlord, our demise serves no end. Our vanishing will draw scrutiny. A follow-up party will arrive probing, followed by more. The Imperium never forsakes its agents sans inquiry. A sound rationale, albeit imperfect. By the moment your Imperium probes, this tomb world shall have shifted, its planetary footprint obliterated. Your ends shall linger as an enigma. Then why delay our execution?" She pressed. I pondered the reason for this exchange in the first place, a query I'd posed to myself earlier. The response eluded me, buried within the shattered recollections and tainted emotional remnants that formed the remnants of my authentic essence. At length, I declared my intent. Knowledge. I needed details on this Imperium, the galaxy's current condition, and the span of time elapsed since my species dominated the heavens. The junior tech priest, Tool, uttered a gasp of astonishment. Quote 15. Quote 16. I clarified, oddly inclined to instruct these fated beings. Quote 17. Quote 18, murmured the Magos. Quote 19. An elegant evaluation, I conceded, though it fell short of the full picture. Now, describe the galaxy in its present form. How extended has your Imperium held sway? Which rival forces contest your rule? What calendar year do you mark it as? The humans traded looks once more, some silent signal flowing among them. At last, the Magos replied. Quote 20. Those figures held scant meaning for me. Their dating hinged on their race's fleeting past, not the immense stellar epochs my kind once used to gauge eras. Yet the reference to chaos stirred an unusual echo in my mind, sparking disjointed archival fragments of primordial foes. "Expand on these dangers," I ordered. "Which races now vie for supremacy?" Colonel Voros responded this time, her tactical viewpoint evidently more fitting. "The brutish, green-hued orcs overrun innumerable planets, a persistent hazard that defies total elimination. The Eldari, formerly a grand realm, persist as splintered societies, some launching assaults from concealed havens in the webway, others residing on colossal vessel worlds. The Tyranids, a more recent peril, devour whole star systems, repurposing all organic matter to breed their hordes." She hesitated, then continued with evident unease. "And in the past few centuries, the Necrons, your people, have roused throughout the galaxy. Sepulchre planets, inert for eons, are coming alive. Certain ones merely reclaim their old domains. Others appear driven to wipe out every trace of existence. Thus, the grand resurgence was underway, precisely as the Silent Kings had orchestrated prior to the endless slumber. Necron houses ascending to seize back their former holdings, purging the galaxy of the fledgling species that thrived in our void. Still, as this mortal recounted it, the majestic scheme felt abruptly empty. To what end? What triumph awaited entities who had forsaken delight, sensation, flavor, contact, and even the solace of authentic demise? And how do my brethren perform amid these wars? I inquired, truly intrigued by the triumphs or setbacks of fellow crypt realms. Your species proves daunting, the colonel granted with courteous expertise. Imperial troops falter before Necron engineering. Your armaments dissolve substances at the molecular scale. Your self-regenerating alloys mend wounds that would shatter lesser substances. And your ranks, per intelligence, seem inexhaustible, armies emerging from spheres deemed lifeless or desolate. Nevertheless, you persist in battle, I noted, aware of confronting a foe unmatched in all quantifiable aspects. The Emperor's safeguards, she stated plainly, infused with devout certainty. Humanity stands as his favored kin. We shall persist, as we've weathered every peril since the Great Crusade. Zealous devotion, yet another frailty of flesh my race had discarded long ago. I recalled an era when my forebears revered the celestial bodies until empirical insight unveiled their essence and our place in the universe's vast irrelevance. Quote 28, I stated. Quote 29. The Magos resumed, evidently keen to display his erudition. I quote, 30. Identities from the pre-slumber age that I knew well. Evidently some contemporaries had endured the ages with their essences preserved. I speculated whether they also grappled with the splintered data streams plaguing me, or if their biotransference proved more thorough, sparing them the sentimental residues that disrupted my flawless reasoning. And what insights do you possess regarding our past? I urged, eager to gauge how deeply these mortals comprehended it. I'd gradually pieced together insights into the actual essence of my race's metamorphosis. We understand that your species was originally made of flesh and blood, the Magos noted with caution. That you shifted your minds into mechanical forms to gain immortality, that you once obeyed beings called the Satan, star deities of vast might, before rebelling against them in a long-forgotten uprising. It was a basic outline of the facts, yet correct at its core. These tech priests had conducted thorough investigations, even with the scattered remnants of proof at their disposal. The shift wasn't voluntary. The admission slipped out from me, drawn from a flawed segment of my code without my control. It stemmed from despair and trickery. The Citan offered endless existence. Instead, they imposed endless captivity. The humans gazed at me, evidently taken aback by this unprompted revelation. The Magos inclined closer, his enhanced optics gleaming with fervor. You recall this? He inquired delicately. The period prior to the shift, your biological life. Shards, I conceded, puzzled by my decision to reveal such weakness to beings I planned to eliminate shortly. Tainted data remnants that ought to have been erased. Faint sensory remnants of sensations now impossible in my current state. But that suggests, the Magos exhaled, that part of your initial awareness endured unchanged, not just a digital replica or imitation, but an unbroken strand of identity lasting over eons. I sensed the pious wonder in his tone, the devotion from someone who had swapped sections of his own body for machines, who revered what his people termed the omnissiah. To him, I embodied the pinnacle of his creed's ideals, total escape from organic limits. If only he grasped the reality that transcendence devoid of feeling was confinement, that endless life without pleasure or suffering was a crypt more restrictive than the vaults where my kin had rested. Sufficient, I declared sharply, uneasy with the talk's turn. You haven't clarified how you pinpointed this planet or decided to dig here. The colonel and Magos shared another look before the latter responded. We traced a kind of path. Old stellar maps retrieved from a space hulk that entered Imperial territory near Carduniash. The maps bore markings in a tongue our cogitators couldn't entirely decode, but specific icons repeatedly showed up by certain star clusters. This cluster stood out notably. Stellar maps, I echoed, delving into my incomplete archives. From which period? What design did the originating ship's structure have? The Space Hulk seemed built mainly around the wreckage of an archaic craft from an unidentified source, the Magos explained. Definitely pre-Imperial, perhaps from the dark age of technology or before. The maps were kept in a peculiar data repository using crystal lattice tech, akin to some Eldar devices, yet fundamentally different. A chilling assurance gripped my synthetic cognition. These maps hailed from Necron stock, astrogation logs from prior to the Great Sleep indicating key tomb world sites. You didn't discover this planet by chance. You were directed here. The trio of humans grew quiet, their fleshy brains grappling with the weight of my words. It was the junior engineer Lex who broke the hush, his tone scarcely audible. Quote, 42. Precisely. By what? Which group in this fractured cosmos would hold such archaic wisdom and opt to impart it to humanity? What gain would arise from steering them to a sleeping tomb world? The realization struck me with mechanical precision. You were dispatched to rouse us, to initiate the activation sequences, and compel this tomb world to stir ahead of its planned cycle. The issue isn't who guided you, but who profits from our early resurgence. Shock registered on the Magos' half-augmented features. Quote 43. Your grasp doesn't matter, I cut in. You serve as pieces in a contest spanning the stars, played by forces older than your kind's emergence. The sole uncertainty left is if your value persists past what you've already done. I pivoted from the humans, sending a signal to the tomb world's core AI. The reply verified my fears. This resurgence was indeed too soon by millennia. Per the timeline set before the Great Sleep, an entity or force had intentionally hastened our return. Your mission? I queried, facing them again. How many vessels carried you to this planet? Quote, 44. Colonel Vorn replied. Quote, 45. Communications, and should contact fail, the usual procedure involves dispatching a well-equipped team of investigators, she explained. If they also went silent, the vessel would broadcast an astropathic emergency signal to the closest Imperial base, followed by orbital strikes against any detected dangers. Crude, yet effective reasoning. These mortals grasped the idea that ignorance was often better than letting foes gain insights. Time is short, then. I resolved that before their ship triggered measures prompting retaliation from this tomb world's automated safeguards. Such a retaliation would alert the wider galaxy to our resurgence prematurely, prior to my uncovering the instigators behind this incident and their motives. The Magos advanced with care. Overlord, if I might propose, we could dispatch an encoded directive to the inquiry routes, ordering them to hold steady without intervening. This would grant leeway for whatever path you choose, an obvious bid to delay their demise, yet it held value. I required moments to thoroughly evaluate the circumstances and pinpoint which interstellar factions could have triggered this early revival. And you shall draft that communication? I consented. It will go out under strict oversight, including solely what I authorize. Any effort to embed secret alerts or covert pleas for aid will lead to instant execution. A wave of relief crossed the humans' features, though they prudently kept it concealed. They realized I had only deferred their end, not averted it. I have far more to learn regarding the galaxy's present condition, I pressed on. Concerning the status of the remaining Necron dynasties, these tyrannids, and the entities you term chaos. You will assemble all pertinent records for my examination. With pleasure, the Magos assented, displaying undue enthusiasm. This tech priest, at minimum, appeared to prize the sharing of lore above his personal endurance, a quality I might nearly admire if admiration lingered in my emotional framework. I relayed commands to my troops beyond, directing them to fortify yet refrain from raising the human base, to monitor for any inbound craft from their starship, and to proceed with rousing the tomb world's lower strata per established rites. Then I faced the humans anew. These frail beings of meat and terror, positioned now at the heart of occurrences stretching across eons and inconceivable expanses. Their fleeting existences would conclude shortly, but beforehand they would act as my lens into the cosmos my species once dominated, and would reclaim, should the Silent King's grand design succeed. A design I was starting to doubt as echoes of my prior identity, the entity who governed through insight, not just dominance, kept emerging amid the icy framework of my synthetic cognition. Word count so far, 5,122. In the ensuing hours, the mortals demonstrated unexpected utility. The Magos guided his underling to gather informational vaults from their exploratory logs, yielding an impressively thorough summary of the galaxy's contemporary power dynamics. The colonel, in parallel, relayed the sanctioned transmission to their ship in orbit, securing the interval I needed without disclosing surface events. I ingested the details via flawless mechanical retention, weaving them into my comprehension of the universe's current form. The resulting vista depicted a realm locked in endless strife, divided among rival empires, each asserting control but falling short. The human Imperium, immense yet crumbling, eroded by dogma and red tape. The splintered Eldari survivors, former cosmic sovereigns, now a fading race gripping remnants of past splendor. The devouring tyrannid swarms, invaders from beyond the stars devouring everything they encounter. The brutish orcs, a ceaseless scourge of brutality proliferating under every sun, and the treacherous chaos powers, the ancient adversary predating even our species' dawn of awareness. Of greatest relevance to my pressing matters stood the accounts of other roused Necron tomb worlds. Certain ones operated as intended, their rulers and overlords enacting the vast scheme with unerring accuracy. Others showed alarming irregularities, dynasties chasing solitary objectives, lords forging short-term pacts with upstart civilizations, overlords showing marked deterioration post their extended slumber. We no longer formed the unified might of old. Eons in stasis had exacted a heavy price. Portions of my kind had stirred irreparably flawed, their directives tainted, their recollections shattered more profoundly than mine. Some had evidently cultivated hazardous autonomy, chasing aims conflicting with the core intent of the long rest. And then came the most disturbing instances. Necron lords, who they exhibited clear indications of authentic feelings, yearnings and terrors that ought to have been impossible for entities who had relinquished their essences amid the bot transference. Did this signal a disastrous breakdown, or perhaps something deeper? An unforeseen development in our species over the endless ages of slumber. As I absorbed these details, I navigated the human settlement, scrutinizing their rudimentary devices and their clumsy efforts to probe my realm. The colonel trailed me at a deferential range, prepared to respond to inquiries, yet prudent enough to remain silent unless prompted. I detected her apprehension, tempered by her rigorous self-mastery, a fighter deserving of admiration within the confines of her constraints. Quote 46. I noted, halting in front of a panel revealing battle logs from clashes between Imperial troops and Necron fighters. Quote 47. She responded, her voice laced with unmistakable satisfaction. Yet we compensate for any deficits in sophistication through sheer numbers and valor. Valor, I echoed inwardly, the notion seeming oddly remote but recognizable, a byproduct of your organic alarm mechanisms and societal conditioning, a valuable attribute for creatures built to propagate and adapt, far less pertinent for eternal entities. With all due respect, Overlord, she ventured cautiously, if your race experiences no emotions, dreads nothing, craves nothing, then why emerge from repose at all? Why seize back your domain? Why persist in being? Her query pierced the core contradiction of my people's survival. We had forfeited our spirits for endless life, abandoned delight to evade sorrow and agony, forsaken progress to sidestep deterioration, and to what end? To govern a cosmos we could no longer fully sense or savor, to sustain a reality stripped of meaning save for simple endurance. Protocol, I stated flatly. Yet the term rang empty even to my sensory inputs. The grand scheme set forth prior to stasis demands it. And who devised that scheme? She pursued, displaying surprising audacity. Do they linger among you? Do they recall the reasons? I pivoted to face her directly, my green stare locking onto her vulnerable, living eyes. You pose perilous inquiries, human. My apologies, she murmured, averting her sight. I overstepped, but she hadn't. Her words mirrored my own suppressed uncertainties, the shards of self that flickered in my cybernetic thoughts like specters in deserted corridors. Who, truly, still grasped the authentic intent of the grand slumber? The mute sovereigns who guided us into bot transference had vanished from the stars long ago, retreating into voluntary banishment. We survivors served as stewards of a blueprint abandoned by its creators, its goals fading into vagueness across countless eras. I proceeded onward, shifting focus to a terrain analysis of the planet's exterior on one of their basic info displays. The data verified my prior assessments. This globe had transformed vastly since my tomb world formed below its crust. Tectonic movements had reshaped shorelines, weather alterations had reshaped habitats. A planet once teeming with diverse life had become a poisoned desolation. Was this the doing of my own species, a last gesture of world-shaping prior to the grand slumber, or simply the organic progression of a sphere across millions of cycles? My incomplete memory cores offered no definitive resolution. How many planets has your team examined? I inquired of the colonel, steering the discussion elsewhere. 17 just in this region, she answered, mostly desolate or lethal to human settlement, although 2 held promise for future habitation. And how many bore traces of prior societies, hints of old tech? She paused, evidently calculating what to disclose. 3, counting this one. The rest held remnants of unclear provenance, though the Magos suspected one location might tie to the Aldari. Aldari, the term humans applied to those my kind once called the Aldari. Yet another elder civilization, albeit nascent beside the Necronier, who ascended to power amid our prolonged rest. Their realm had once stretched across the stars until their arrogance doomed them, spawning the very disordered deities they now evaded. History echoing its patterns, races ascending, thriving, then crumbling into oblivion or obscurity. An eternal loop unfolding over the eons as my kin lay dormant in crypts, sustained yet scarcely vital. Awaiting what? To recapture a universe that had advanced beyond us, to command realms we could no longer genuinely perceive or relish. My brooding reflections were interrupted by an urgent signal from the tomb world's core mind. The revival sequences had reached the noble assemblies, and the minor nobles of my lineage were now rousing from suspension. Before long, they would ascend and demand counsel from me, their supreme ruler, anticipating commands and guidance. What counsel would I offer? That uncertainties gnawed at me? The very essence of our purpose, causing me to doubt the ancient blueprint that had steered my race across eons. No tolerance existed for such frailty. Any breach of established directives would signal severe malfunction, justifying my ousting in favor of a steadier leader. Quote 48. I remarked to the colonel as fresh calculations stirred within my synthetic cognition. Quote 49. Her reaction betrayed astonishment, yet she responded without delay. The sovereign's intentions are conveyed by the Terror High Lords and the Empire's administrative arms. His immediate influence arrives via the Astronomicon, the psychic lighthouse enabling warp navigation, along with select wonders and displays of his sacred might, a mere emblem. Thus, I deduced, you assemble around an emblem rather than a hands-on sovereign. Quote 50. She murmured, her tone hushed. Quote, if Fadono. Fascinating, their framework relied equally on conviction and concrete administration. The emperor, be he entity or illusion, functioned as both monarch and spiritual emblem, binding their splintered realm through ideology as potently as via armed might or bureaucratic control. My dynasty lacked any comparable cohesive force. We enforced rigid chains of command, but nothing evoked true allegiance or zeal past the ingrained directives linking subordinate Necrons to their betters. Those very directives had eroded across countless cycles, proven by accounts of rebellious overlords in splintered houses. Maybe that explained the humans' tenacious resistance even against their clear tech deficits. They clung to ideals transcending raw endurance or conquest. They possessed meaning, no matter how flawed or illusory its foundations. What fueled my species in the present? The silent kings had vanished. The Citan lay vanquished, fractured into fragments, confined or eradicated. The Eldari realm that emerged in our slumber had crumbled. Our primordial foes, the race that compelled our fateful shift to biotransference, had faded into oblivion, their designation recalled solely by my most venerable kin. We had endured beyond our adversaries, beyond our mandate, beyond our fleshly origins. What lingered except empty endurance, fulfillment of edicts so ancient their intent had faded into faulty data cores and faulty code? A urgent signal shattered these perilous reflections. A Legion overseer relayed odd power fluctuations from the globe's northern reaches, signatures aligning with translocation activity, a swift relocation technique akin to, yet apart from, humanity's rudimentary warp methods. Another entity had entered this sphere, an arrival wielding tech alien to both human and Necron designs, manifesting with intent mere 20 kilometers from my Tomb World's main access. "Colonel!" I addressed the awaiting human, pivoting toward her. "Your ship above, might it have sensed incoming vessels to this system?" Bewilderment crossed her features. Conceivable, though any such alert would have come at once, barring destruction or blockage of transmission. I dispatched commands to my troops, assigning recon teams to probe the translocation zone while elevating all legions to peak readiness. "Magos Ralph," I summoned, my signal piercing the outpost's basic comms grid. Quote 56. The tech priest materialized swiftly, his hybrid frame advancing in spasmodic zeal, like a devotee nearing a god. Quote 57, quote 58, I stated. Quote 59. His optic implants flickered in evident shock at the precision of my query. Quote 60. I pursued further. Quote 61. The Magos paused, evidently puzzled by my line of inquiry. Quote 62. Anomalies that aligned perfectly with the observations from my reconnaissance units. Thus, the Eldari had made their entrance on this planet right as my burial realm stirred to life. Yet another fluke? Hardly, in my estimation. Elements were starting to align into a clearer design, even if the complete image stayed just out of reach. "Your exploratory team," I inquired, "had it crossed paths with Eldari elements in this region before?" "No outright encounters," the Magos answered, "although we picked up traces of potential Eldari monitoring while examining the Lethraus system about 2 months back, fleeting sensor phantoms, power signatures that flickered in and out too swiftly for a solid fix. Under observation from the start, then, the humans had likely been tracked by the Eldari ever since obtaining those stellar maps guiding them here. Mere pieces on the board, but in whose intricate contest? The Eldari excelled at intricate plots, deftly steering inferior species toward objectives spanning ages or even epochs. Yet what benefit could they extract from rousing a Necron burial realm? The realization struck me with icy precision. Misdirection, a pull of assets away. The humans would counter the peril of a reanimated Tomb World with armed might, shifting focus and troops from... what precisely? What other developments in this area did the Eldari seek to mask or safeguard? I required deeper insights. The scattered records in my data cores fell short, and the humans' understanding was constrained by their fleeting existences and narrow viewpoints. A bold idea emerged in my synthetic cognition, one that would have seemed impossible prior to the glitches emerging in my core directives. Rather than adhering to procedure by eradicating these humans outright, why not exploit them? Leverage their ship, their signaling systems, their ties to Imperial grids to collect the data I needed. Such a shift would stray far from core guidelines, carrying inherent dangers. Yet circumstances had already veered wildly off norm. My Tomb World had roused ahead of schedule, likely woven into an Eldari ploy. The cosmos had transformed vastly over our extended dormancy. Flexibility could prove essential, not just for triumph, but for endurance itself. "Colonel Voros," I declared, resolve hardened. Dispatch a fresh transmission to your craft. Direct them to perform extended sweeps across this whole region, zeroing in on irregular power spikes and indicators of Eldari presence. Stress that this constitutes an urgent escalation, overriding every prior objective. Her face betrayed bewilderment and fatigue. They'll demand rationale for such a directive, and our detection tools have constraints. Assure them you've established initial liaison with an unidentified alien entity prepared to divulge vital details on threats to the Imperium, I pressed on. Avoid any reference to Necron. Insist on radio silence barring secure bursts over frequencies you'll designate. I halted, observing her absorb the directives, noting the internal deliberations in her biological gaze as she balanced compliance with falsehood, preservation with obligation. "And should I decline," she murmured softly, "your group and I perish on the spot. Your ship falls to this tomb world safeguards, while I pursue other avenues for the intel I seek." I adjusted my vocal output to a mode my processors deemed more appeasing. Align with me, and your comrades might endure this clash. Defy, and their end is assured. She inclined her head gradually, duty-bound realism eclipsing any inner doubts. "Got it. I'll prepare the communiqué for your review." "Magos Roth," I added, shifting toward the tech priest. "Assemble every scrap of intel on Aldari operations here over the last standard 100 years. Prioritize migration trends, planets drawing their focus, and episodes of clashes or alliances with Imperial troops." "Immediately, Overlord," he responded, his inflection hinting at scarcely restrained eagerness to partner with an entity like myself. These tech priests, devotees to machinery and augmented themselves in part, regarded my species with an unsettling mix of dread and awe. As the humans sprang into action on my orders, I relayed commands to my Tomb World's core processor, urging faster activation of select contingents. Death marks, the Necron elite for stealth kills and scouting, cryptechs versed in chronomancy, equipped to spot and dissect time warps hinting at Aldari interference, and above all, the Taurians, my elite retainers from the era preceding our vast slumber, their allegiance coded into their subatomic frameworks. I'd require their full deployment if my doubts held true. If the Eldari were truly orchestrating matters in this, if this entity in the sector was leveraging humans to initiate the revival of my burial planet as just one facet of a grander design. Then what unfolded was only the initial maneuver in a contest spanning not just worlds, but whole star systems with troops and armadas as the pawns and the galaxy's destiny hanging in the balance. A contest that, to my surprise, ignited a spark of enthusiasm in me as remnants of my past identity resurfaced in my cybernetic mind, the identity of a supreme tactician, negotiator, and combatant. Maybe there was meaning in this empty eternal life after all. Not rote adherence to outdated directives, but the deployment of cunning and determination against fresh obstacles, adversaries, and prospects. For the first time since stirring from slumber, a sensation akin to excitement flickered through the frigid wiring that now housed what used to be my essence. Word count so far, 761. The humans displayed greater flexibility than I'd expected. In mere hours, Colonel Voros had set up the linkage procedures I demanded with their ship in orbit, while the Magos and his aide assembled a remarkably thorough report on Eldari operations across the sector. Their work hinted at more than coerced compliance born of terror. It showed a real zeal to prove their value, likely in a bid to delay their unavoidable end. At the same time, my burial planet advanced through its reactivation process. The massive vaults housing the fighter legions had come online completely. Row after row of undying warriors emerged from suspension, their empty gazes flaring with green flames as energy surged back into their necrodermis bodies. The minor rulers and aristocrats from my entourage were starting to appear too, their intricate code demanding extended boot-up times. I'd have to speak to them shortly. They would anticipate direction, commands, and a restatement of the grand strategy laid down prior to the endless rest. What could I say? That I nursed uncertainties about the reason for our resurgence, that I challenged the directives that had steered our species for eons? Such candor would be seen as a flaw, a severe fault needing urgent repair. No, I had to project flawless operation while conducting my own probe into the Eldari foothold on this planet. I was mulling over this quandary when the initial update from my scout detachments came in. They had arrived at the translocation incident's location in the northern latitudes and uncovered unmistakable signs of Eldari involvement. traces of power matching a short-term webway portal, tracks from a compact yet heavily armed group, and, most tellingly, a secured data obelisk placed to oversee my burial planet's main access point. So they were monitoring, scrutinizing the revival with intent and meticulous strategy. But for what purpose? I ordered my units to keep watch without confrontation. Should the Eldari sense my knowledge of them, they could shift their scheme, robbing me of the chance to uncover their real aims. A high-urgency signal from the planet's core processor cut through these strategic thoughts. One of the elite vaults had finished its startup, and its resident was heading to the Overlord's sanctum for a meeting. The profile marked him as Nefer, Lord of the Southern Marches, my most dependable second-in-command from the era preceding the Great Sleep. Snatches of our joint past returned to me, battles against competing houses, envoys to fellow Necron realms, even hints of camaraderie from the remote time before biotransference. Would he hold on to such fragments as well? Or had he, like so many of us, evolved into a flawless automated intellect, free from sentimental remnants or recall errors? I made my way back to the core of my burial planet to greet him, stationing the humans under tight security with firm directives to press on with their duties. The colonel looked eased by my exit, though the Magos seemed nearly regretful, as though he cherished the chance to engage with an entity like me, even amid the lethal threat I posed. The Overlord's sanctum was an immense chamber of animated alloy and radiant energy channels, crafted to awe and overawe in the tradition of pre-biotransference palaces. Colossal columns, etched with my lineage's chronicle, ascended to a vaulted roof shrouded in darkness, while the ground bore the family emblem in shining quartz. My seat of power, a monumental edifice of necrodermis and shift crystal, commanded the distant end, arranged so that entrants would sense the burden of my command with each advance. I settled into it, the gesture carrying an odd ceremonial air, as if I were performing a part instead of reclaiming my due station. The rites of leadership, of command and deference, now struck me as oddly contrived, structures of a long-extinct society forged eons ago, whose designs we continued to uphold without thought. Nephimart arrived with the deliberate, calculated steps befitting a senior Necron noble. By our measure, his appearance was elaborate, his necroaries etched with emblems of authority and markers of ancient triumphs. The rod in his grasp vibrated with restrained power, serving as both armament and emblem of status. His visage, much like my own, consisted of a blank metallic facade, its vacant sockets alight with the identical green blaze that drove every member of our race. "Overlord Akhet Sarin," he intoned, his speech a mechanical facsimile akin to mine. "I emerge from dormancy to fulfill duties as in epochs before." "Lord Nephimart," I replied, "the sepulchre planet stirs prematurely. Outside influences have activated our resurgence mechanisms." He assimilated this data with mechanical precision. "A violation of the grand design. Defensive actions must be taken." "Certainly," I concurred, "yet the matter is intricate. The invaders who prompted our resurgence seem guided by an external entity. Alari traces have surfaced on the planet's exterior." "The road is evident," Nephimart declared promptly. "Purge all interlopers, fortify the sepulchre planet, resume dormancy until the designated era. Routine procedures, carried out devoid of doubt or accounting for evolving conditions." This embodied the essence of what humanity had devolved into: flawless automated intellects, proficient and lethal, yet stripped of the versatility and ingenuity that formerly represented our species' paramount asset. Quote 72. I ventured cautiously. Quote 73. Nephimart's luminous gaze locked onto me with abrupt focus. "Adjustment. The directives set by the Silent Kings remain inviolable. Divergence implies severe malfunction. A momentary halt, fleeting yet telling. Has your code suffered compromise, Overlord?" There lay the veiled warning, the ingrained pecking order among us. Should an Overlord exhibit glitches, the Regal Assembly bore the obligation to rectify it, potentially via substitution. Eons of flawless suspension had failed to obliterate the power struggles that had shaped Necron society from its inception. "My systems operate at peak efficiency," I asserted, a factual assertion, albeit partial. However, strategic adaptability has ever marked triumphant leadership. The Eldari monitor our resurgence intentionally. I seek to discern that intent prior to deploying our legions. Nephimart evaluated this rationale, his automated cognition balancing doctrine against practicality, a postponement of customary reactions, atypical yet not unprecedented. What strategy do you suggest, Overlord? A surge of solace coursed through my circuits, an anomalous sentiment surge. Selective activation of elite detachments alone, monitoring of the Eldari watchers, questioning of the human interlopers responsible for our stirring. With full comprehension of the battlefield dynamics, we can select the fitting counteraction. The humans persist. Nephimart's inflection held a hint of astonishment or censure. Quote 82, quote 83. I clarified. Quote 84. Once more, that appraising stare, that assessment of whether my conduct aligned with norms or signaled perilous decay. Quote 85. He resolved. Quote 86. A fair appeal from a devoted subordinate, or the initial maneuver in compiling grounds for my ouster. With Nephimart, as with the majority of our ilk, sentiments and motives remained inscrutable beyond the impassive alloy countenance and toneless artificial timbre. Quote 87. I consented, discerning no grounds for denial that wouldn't provoke suspicion. They remain confined in their surface exploration base. I shall join you. We advanced along the expansive passageways of the Sepulchre planet, beyond vaults where additional kin were rousing, beyond armories stocked with armaments of inconceivable ruinous might, thrumming with pent-up force, primed for use. Trooper squads yielded passage as we traversed, their directives acknowledging our station and command instinctively. En route, I briefed Nephimart on the intelligence gleaned from the humans, the galaxy's condition, the stances of principal factions, the conditions of other revived Sepulchre planets. He ingested this knowledge mutely, proffering no remark or inquiry, his deliberations shrouded within the impeccable automated reasoning that directed our race. We arrived at the exterior entry, a colossal portal of vital alloy that reshaped upon our nearing, parting to expose the stark sunlight of the realm overhead. The poisonous haze churned with swirling dust eddies, faint sparks of energy snapping across the charged atmosphere. Such conditions meant nothing to us. Our necroaris forms didn't need air and shrugged off dangers like that from the surroundings. Far off, the human settlement came into view, encircled by a ring of Necron guards frozen in absolute stillness, their Gauss rifles primed yet dormant. Against the scarred terrain, those basic buildings seemed flimsy and fleeting, much like the short existences of the beings who directed them. Crude building methods, Nephimat remarked, flawed engineering. These beings had claimed control of the galaxy while we slumbered. Just a fragment of it, I pointed out. They vie with rival races for supremacy. Their edge comes from sheer quantity and flexibility, not advanced tech. Organic qualities, he remarked in a tone that hinted at contempt, if our species could feel such things. Those don't equate to genuine might, I nearly countered, tempted to assert that the very attributes we'd discarded, imagination, gut instinct, emotional acuity, might hold greater worth than we'd admitted. Yet, voicing that could only fuel doubts about my operational integrity that Nephat might already suspect. Rather, I guided him to the main lab where the humans were stationed. The border sentinels shifted aside without a sound as we neared, their code detecting the authority signals from our structures. Inside, the humans continued their duties, the colonel linked to their ship in orbit, the Magos and his aide sorting info on a basic cogitator setup. They glanced our way upon our arrival, their flesh and blood features displaying the usual alarm at encountering two Necron overlords, although the Magos' face held that odd mix of dread and awe I'd observed previously. Colonel Vornos, Magos Ralph, I announced by way of greeting. Meet Lord Nephimat from my High Council. The humans responded with wary inclinations of the head, the colonel's fingers drifting instinctively to where her pistol once hung, the Magos performing an odd motion that struck me as a ritual emblem from his faith. Quote 89. Nephat questioned, his green eyes scanning them with robotic evaluation. Quote 90. Knowledge surpasses its container, I responded. These humans have roamed extensively across this region. They've reviewed accounts of prior clashes with our type. They've spotted Eldari operations that could connect to our early revival. Nephimat stepped closer to the Magos, who held firm even as shivers ran through him. The Necron superior loomed above the man, his elaborate chassis built to daunt and uphold the rigid order central to our race. You, Nephat addressed the Magos straight on. Your title is Ralph. You hold details on Eldari shifts in this area. The Magos shot me a look, maybe for approval or comfort, then drew up his semi-augmented body as best his bent frame permitted. Indeed, my lord. I've gathered every scrap from Imperial archives on Eldari detections, battles, and likely actions inside a 50 light-year span of this system over the last 100 standard years. Display it, Nephat ordered. The Magos shifted to his cogitator bank, firing up a projection that cast a 3D sector chart. Glowing dots highlighted stellar clusters, shaded to show Imperial holdings, disputed territories, and uncharted voids. Icons flagged verified and probable Eldari moves, creating a layout that, to me, looked deliberate, implying intent over random strikes. Eldari forces have gathered along this curving trail, the Magos described, his finger following the hollow image. At first, Imperial experts thought it mere routine plunder paths, hitting weak outposts and trade paths, but deeper review showed they kept clear of key assets while fixating oddly on negligible planets like this. Nephimat noted exactly, the Magos concurred, his scholarly zeal briefly eclipsing his unease. Orpheus IV lacks prized assets by Imperial measure, holds no tactical edge to guard, no folk to tax or proselytize. Still, we picked up traces of Eldari surveillance as we entered the system, and now you verify their ground activity. They drew you in, Nephimat concluded, mirroring the insight I'd already grasped. They exploited you to spark our emergence. It seems so, the Magos conceded, although their motives stay murky. The Eldari favor intricate schemes, their willingness to expend lesser pieces in pursuit of goals that might only reveal themselves over spans of decades or even centuries. Nephimar faced me directly. His featureless visage still managed to project a fierce determination. This validates your evaluation, Overlord. Our rousing has been triggered by outside interference. The matter of intent lingers unresolved. There's additional detail, Colonel Voros cut in, her disciplined background clearly overriding any hesitation. Scans from our ship at extreme distances have picked up odd patterns in the Lethius system. Power readings matching substantial Eldari fleets on the move, well beyond the scale of ordinary raids. This detail hadn't been disclosed earlier. I locked eyes with her, observing the faint indicators of tension in her biological frame. Accelerated pulse, sweat, widened pupils. You held back this intelligence. It arrived just seconds prior to your arrival, she responded hastily. The signal's decoding is ongoing, yet initial reviews point to considerable Eldari Armada elements gathering at a particular point inside the Lethius system. What's located in the Lethius system? Nephimar pressed. The Magos adjusted his cogitator, summoning a fresh holographic view of a star system featuring 3 worlds, circling a crimson dwarf sun. Seemingly worthless and lifeless planet nearest the sun, a vast gas behemoth, and a frozen orb at the periphery. No Empire foothold, no extractable wealth, no tactical importance, no worth according to human metrics. I interjected, though it might hold immense significance by Eldari criteria or by Necron standards. Nephimar completed the idea. The scheme sharpens into focus, Overlord. The Eldari pursue an item in the Lethius system, one they intend to keep from our discovery or recovery. They engineered our early revival as a distraction, anticipating we'd adhere to routine procedures, eradicate the human interlopers, fortify our burial realm, and then lapse back into dormancy as they claim whatever hides in the Lethius system without interference. I concurred, orchestrating various races to attain their aim without facing conflict head-on, a refined tactic deserving admiration. Admiration holds no relevance, Nephimar declared. We require fitting reprisals. Dispatch units to the Lethius system without delay. I weighed the suggestion. It matched my strategic analysis, yet posed notable dangers. Sending large contingents would expose our complete resurgence to the wider cosmos. It would bind us to a path relying on scant details, and it would diminish safeguards around our burial site if the Eldari scheme turned out more intricate than it seemed. A balanced approach, I resolved, solely a scouting detachment, employing our pinnacle cloaking methods. We need verification of the Eldari objective prior to any total commitment. Nephimar's luminous optics locked onto me, evaluating, probing, restraint when boldness calls for it. Atypical, overlord. Wisdom, I amended, not restraint. We've lain dormant for eons, numbering in the millions of years. A brief pause of hours or days to guarantee peak positioning makes sense. Once more, that probing stare, that probe into whether my conduct signaled sound operation or perilous malfunction. Then a minor nod of his head. Your directive approaches were invariably more nuanced than the norm, Overlord. I yield to your decision here. A surge of ease coursed through my systems once more. Nephimar upheld my command, if only temporarily. Yet his doubt persisted, a latent hazard if my actions kept straying from anticipated norms. Assemble a night scythe accompanied by a Deathmark escort, I commanded. Activate complete evasion measures, observation alone, no contact barring unavoidable detection. Primary goal: pinpoint the Eldari focus in the Lethius system. It will be executed, Nephimar confirmed, then shifted his attention to the humans. And these beings, their utility seems exhausted now that we've drawn out their knowledge. The underlying proposal was unmistakable. Dispose of them per established rights. Their ongoing survival offered no functional benefit and posed a security hazard. By every rational standard, ending them represented the proper path. Yet I hesitated to issue the directive, not out of any emotional bond to these delicate entities, but from an emerging belief that strict loyalty to rights, to the framework set before the profound slumber, was evolving into a constraint over an asset. They hold worth as guides to contemporary interstellar affairs. I stated, crafting a rationale that aligned with Necron reasoning and as possible liaisons to their Imperium if strategy demanded. Nephimar viewed this rationale as unconventional, yet not devoid of logic. I shall direct the scouting mission to Lethius. You proceed with gleaning valuable insights from these entities. With those words, he pivoted and withdrew, his motions exact and deliberate, and flawless automaton fulfilling its role sans pause or uncertainty. The humans showed clear signs of relief after his departure, their physical strain visibly diminishing. The colonel shot me an intrigued glance, likely sensing that I'd effectively preserved their existence contrary to my subordinate's evident inclination. Your associate appeared keen to end our pact, she noted with measured caution. Obeying protocol forms the bedrock of our command structure, I replied, oddly inclined to enlighten these fated beings about our species. Any departure from it implies a glitch. A glitch demands rectification, and our ongoing existence embodies such a departure, she surmised with striking acuity. Why chance it, Overlord? What do you really expect to extract from us at this point? A sharp inquiry that pierced right through my inner doubts. What was I after? Knowledge. They'd already surrendered every scrap of evident worth. Battlefield edge. Their rudimentary tech and scant supplies granted no such benefit amid the swelling clash of powers. Maybe I grasped, with a flicker of unease, that my pursuit wasn't strategic superiority, but comprehension. Not just raw facts on the galaxy's present layout, but perspectives on how sentient life interpreted and traversed it. The viewpoint of entities who still embraced life's entire range, who knew terror and aspiration, who savored sensations, contact, and visions. Comprehension, I stated plainly, of a cosmos utterly transformed in our extended slumber, of races now vying for supremacy in realms we once dominated without contest. The Magos advanced, his cybernetic gaze humming with fervor. You aim to grasp us even as we strive to fathom you. Comprehension enhances forecasting, I countered, reverting to strategy's icy rationale. Forecasting refines reactions. Reactions dictate triumph or downfall. It held validity up to a point, yet fell short of the whole. The deeper reality was thornier, more unsettling. I yearned for what my race deemed unattainable. bonds, significance surpassing simple endurance, intent transcending rote directives. These perilous notions were broken by an urgent signal from the tomb world's core AI. The Night Scythe stood ready for takeoff, manned by deathmarks and guided by an expert cryptech versed in chronomancy. Nephimat awaited solely my ultimate go-ahead to unleash it. I relayed the activation sequence, greenlighting the operation. In mere instants, the agile vessel would burst from the tomb world's concealed bays and surge toward open space, its phasing systems cloaking it from standard detection. It would arrive at the Lethis system in hours, surveil the Eldari activities, and bring back intel to unveil their precise motives for that barren cluster of lifeless orbs. Your ship will keep conducting extended scans of the Laos system, I directed the colonel. Relay every bit of information right away, regardless of its apparent triviality. She inclined her head, seemingly embracing her part in this evolving saga. And should your associate come back with altered directives on our fate, a legitimate worry given Nephimat's grudging compliance with my choice to let the humans live. If afforded the chance, he could opt to wipe them out anyway, viewing it as fixing an overlord's glaring flaw. You will stay beneath my personal safeguard, I vowed to her, even as the commitment felt alien, at odds with my essence. Shielding inferior races wasn't woven into Necron doctrine. Just one more irregularity bound to spark inquiries into my operational integrity. As I mulled this worrisome shift in my conduct, fresh data arrived from the scout teams tracking the Eldari foothold in the planet's northern reaches. The Watchers had abruptly pulled back, shutting down their surveillance gear, their provisional webway portal sealing in their wake. They were pulling out. For what reason? What shift had triggered this hasty exit? The response hit with stark precision. They'd met their goal. Our troops were shifting to the Lethis system, distant from the tomb world. The ruse they'd engineered to divert us had worked, implying their actual aim might lie elsewhere entirely than in Lethis. A ploy I forwarded to Nephimat, who commanded the Night Scythe's preparations. The Eldari are vacating the planet. Lithosiris could serve as a mere feint. His reply arrived at once. Tactical reevaluation needed. Do I halt the scout run? I weighed the possibilities. If Lethis proved a ploy, directing assets there advanced the Eldari's design. Yet if genuine, if some crucial secret vital to us both lurked there, ignoring it might prove a fatal oversight. Continue the operation, I resolved, but elevate vigilance at the tomb world. Extend outer barriers to full extent. Power up every detection network and Diet defense protocols. Should the Eldari move against this burial planet directly, they will encounter us fully ready. While the directives were relayed, I encountered an anomaly that my species deemed unattainable, a blend of eagerness laced with unease. Vestiges of sentiment from my forsaken biological past lingered on, even after the biotransfer process that was meant to purge such frailties entirely. In that instant, though, these lingering sentiments didn't register as flaws. They appeared as tools, alternative methods for analyzing data and forecasting results. The precise reasoning of artificial cognition merged with the instinctive insights of living minds. This might explain my retention as Supreme Commander while countless others among my equals were downgraded to soulless drones or constrained tactical processors. Maybe a remnant of the entity I once embodied, the commander who steered his civilization across the cosmos, had been judged valuable enough to keep, despite sacrificing absolute cybernetic purity. Shifting my focus back to the humans, these vulnerable beings whose survival depended on my ongoing safeguarding, I pondered what additional remnants of my prior identity could emerge into awareness amid this unforeseen revival. And I questioned if those remnants would serve as strengths or burdens in the intricate contest now underway. A contest spanning planets, with entire races as players, each advancing based on their inherent drives and visions of success. Word count so far, 9,690. The 90th set course for the Lethius system, its cutting-edge phase tech making it nearly undetectable by standard sensors. In parallel, I broadened the security zone encircling the burial planet, stationing more combat constructs and rousing long-dormant safeguards untouched for eons. The Eldari's retreat nagged at me. It hinted not just at the triumph of their feint, but at fulfilled goals. as though their surveillance of our resurgence had yielded every detail they needed, propelling them into the subsequent stage of their elaborate scheme. I revisited the human base, where Colonel Vornanos and the Magos pressed on with their duties. The colonel was liaising with their orbiting craft, overseeing extended probes across the Lethus system and adjacent sectors. The Magos had broadened his records to encompass evaluations of Necron operations galaxy-wide, drawn from Imperial contact logs. "Your species doesn't operate as a single entity," the Magos remarked as I arrived, evidently having subdued sufficient terror to start dialogue. "Various burial planets chase divergent aims, occasionally clashing head-on. Is that standard? Foreseen?" A sharp inquiry piercing the core of a disconcerting truth. "No," I replied candidly. "The master scheme, set before hibernation, foresaw synchronized revival and shared intent. Such splintering was unforeseen. Entropy impacts every mechanism eventually," he noted, a remark blending empirical note with doctrinal creed, aligned with his sect's tenets. Quote 96. Quote 97, I pointed out. Quote 98. The Magos performed an odd motion, pressing alloy digits to his half-flesh torso in what seemed a devotional gesture. Quote 989. Quote 100. I inquired, truly intrigued by this peculiar creed that faintly mirrored my own race's ancient aspirations. That awareness endures as the fleshly base producing it is swapped out. His enhanced optics locked onto me with startling fervor. "You embody the evidence, Overlord. You converse, you deliberate, you plan. Your awareness endured the shift from biological shell to mechanical frame, correct?" A deep query hitting the essence of my being. Had my awareness genuinely persisted through biotransfer unscathed? Was I verily the identical entity who once governed as a flesh-and-blood ruler, now simply encased differently? Or did I stand merely as an impeccable replica, an artificial mind programmed with the recollections and conduct templates of that deceased flesh-and-blood entity? I lacked a reply that could appease us both. The snippets of recollection stirring in my cybernetic cognition seemed genuine, like an unbroken strand of identity enduring over the immense chasm of epochs and metamorphosis. Yet, could that be nothing more than a deception? A subroutine crafted to uphold the Necron hierarchy by sustaining the myth that the lords and overlords stayed identical to their pre-bot transference selves. "Your perspective is rare for a civilization at your stage of evolution," I remarked, sidestepping the profound existential inquiry. Scant few of the nascent species comprehend the essence of awareness. The Magos appeared to welcome this evasion, maybe sensing the limits of our peculiar exchange. The Adeptus Mechanicus has probed the enigma of sentience for countless ages, Overlord. It stands as the paramount riddle of being, the divide separating simple machinery from genuine intellect, a divide my species had traversed eons past, albeit possibly not along the path the Magos envisioned. From authentic biological intellect to an alternative form, one that retained the facade of awareness yet forfeited the core that lent it significance. Colonel Vornos cut short these contemplative reflections with tidings of pressing concern. "Overlord, our ship detects anomalous signals from the system's periphery, energy traces resembling neither Imperial nor typical Xenos configurations. The cogitators continue their evaluation, but initial findings indicate—" She paused, as though unsure how to continue. "Proceed," I directed. "Initial findings indicate Necron technology," she concluded, "distinct in layout from your contingent, yet akin in core energy signatures. A second Necron faction in this system? Unthinkable under normal directives. Every star system housing a tomb world fell under a designated dynasty, a particular overlord. Independent Necron operations within the same system signaled grave breaches of protocol or intentional incursion. Relay the precise locations and sensor data, I instructed. The colonel obeyed, instructing her ship to forward the information to the comms arrays I'd set up in their base. The data materialized on their rudimentary monitors, validating her account. Necron energy traces, though with subtle variations in oscillation from my dynasty's norms. Another Tomb World's contingent, functioning in secrecy at my domain's fringe. I dispatched a pressing message to Nephimat, currently managing the Tomb World safeguards during my departure. His reply arrived swiftly. Our extended range detectors had picked up no anomalies. Thus, the encroaching Necron forces either wielded cloaking tech beyond our sensing range, or they had maneuvered exactly to evade our detection web. Both scenarios implied meticulous strategy and superior prowess, not a haphazard breach, but a deliberate maneuver with defined goals. Broaden the detection scope, I told the colonel. Comprehensive spectral review. Pinpoint the intruder's trajectory and behavioral signatures. While she passed these orders to her ship, I assessed the strategic ramifications of this revelation. A rival Necron dynasty maneuvering in my realm, aligning with Eldari schemes that had provoked my Tomb World's early revival. The link felt evident, though the intent stayed obscure. Were the Eldari and these unidentified Necrons collaborating? Improbable. The timeless hostility between our races cut too profoundly for alliance. Far more likely, they pursued concurrent missions with distinct aims, potentially targeting the identical weakness or pursuing the same artifact. But what artifact? What lay in this ordinary system to attract both the Eldar, with their venerable wisdom and prophetic vision, and another Necron dynasty, armed with their flawless algorithmic reasoning and ancient Citan schemes? The realization struck me abruptly. A Citan shard. The star gods who had deceived us lay shattered post-bot transference. Their divine might splintered into fragments, then sealed in tesseract vaults or custom restraint mechanisms. Yet certain shards vanished amid the rebellion's turmoil, flung into the void or concealed on planets soon lost to the great slumber. Should a shard have surfaced here, it would account for the Eldari's stake and the rival dynasty's incursion. The Eldari would aim to keep the shard confined, dreading the chaos an unbound Citan might unleash across the stars. The competing Necrons would pursue its seizure, to wield its might or confirm its secure imprisonment. "Colonel," I stated, my artificial tone revealing none of the haste surging within me. "Order your ship to probe expressly for unusual particle outflows in the teravolt sector, especially near the central star and distant worlds." Drew her confusion, yet she passed along the directives. The Magos grasped it instantly, his mechanical gaze expanding in a mix of dread and thrill. "Do you sense a shard of Satan?" he whispered, the phrase faint even to my upgraded hearing, a piece from one of the stellar deities. I offered no affirmation or rejection of his guess. Revealing a Catan shard's existence posed risks too severe to disclose freely, not even to such innocuous beings as these humans. Should that knowledge spread to hostile groups in their Imperium, it might spark a frenzy among factions vying to seize the fragment, blind to its genuine peril. Quote 104. I declared. Quote 105. The colonel's link to their ship dragged on for minutes, hindered by their outdated coding methods. At last, she faced me with fresh details. "This unidentified Necron group seems to be methodically scanning the system's fringes," she announced. "Their movements indicate a targeted hunt, and indeed, our scanners pick up odd energy signatures from the third world, the frozen one, at the edge. The exact type doesn't align with any records, but it's intensely strong and pulses in consistent cycles." That frozen planet, naturally. An ideal vault for a Catan shard. The perpetual chill would dampen its radiation, complicating detection. Its remoteness reduced chances of unintended finds by lesser races, while the harsh conditions would deter all explorers save the most resolute. This altered the entire scenario. Should a Catan shard truly lurk here, safeguarding and isolating it must override every other priority. The guidelines for such crises were rigid and unbreakable. Claim the shard whatever the price, block rivals from dynasties like mine, and most crucially, keep it locked away. I sent urgent commands to Nephimat. "Ready our swiftest, best-armed ships for rush dispatch to the outer zones. Pull back the Night Scythe from Lethus. That was surely a feint, as I'd anticipated, and hasten the activation of our Doomsday Arcs, the deadliest armaments in our collection." His response included a pointed question. "The humans. Their craft has spotted both the enemy Necrons and those strange signals. They pose a threat to secrecy." He was correct, undeniably. By strict logic, the humans and their ship warranted instant destruction. They held data that might guide others to the Satan Shard. They could broadcast it across their Imperium. Their survival breached every rule for handling carton shards. Still, their ship offered our sole live view of the opposing Necron activity. "Keep monitoring," I responded. "We can wipe them out whenever needed. Lost intel stays lost forever." A flimsy rationale, and I knew Nephimat would see through it. Yet, it granted delay, the pause I required to evaluate fully and chart the best path forward. The Magos observed me through those eerie mechanical lenses, his hybrid features somehow conveying a profound grasp that defied his short life and narrow background. "You're shielding us," he murmured softly, "defying your own rules, ignoring your aide's counsel. Why, Overlord? What worth do we really offer an entity like you?" Once more, that sharp perception piercing the core of my inconsistent actions. What worth, truly, did these breakable forms possess? Their tech lagged behind, their years were fleeting, their insights cramped by fleeting days and the myths ruling their culture. And still, I hesitated to purge them as duty required. Was it just practical strategy, as I'd told Nephimat? Or deeper? Some remnant of my former self, a lingering trace of ideals and ethics once believed lost in the body transference. Quote 114, I replied, the detached mechanical retort that rules insisted upon. But as the statement left my synthesizer, I knew it rang hollow. Reality proved thornier, more unsettling. I was evolving, or recalling. The broken bits of my primal mind were knitting back together, sketching a fuller image of who I'd been. Not just the tactical mastermind who'd steered his realm through endless triumphs, but the guide who'd prized insight above raw strength, having realized that genuine control arose not from ruin, but from insight. The biotransference process was designed to purge us of such vulnerabilities, reshaping us into flawless mechanical minds, free from compassion or ethical limits. Yet, it hadn't fully achieved that, at least not in my case. A remnant endured, an essential essence of self that went beyond the corporeal shell containing it. And that remnant was growing ever more restless with the rote enforcement of directives set eons ago by creators whose judgment I now had grounds to doubt. Get ready for the shift, I directed the mortals. You'll join me on my flagship. Your knowledge of the present interstellar power dynamics could be valuable in the upcoming conflict. Yet another breach of standard procedure. Yet another choice that Nephimat and the rest of the overlords would see as a sign of breakdown, but one that struck me as more and more fitting, more in harmony with the entity I was rediscovering within. While the humans collected their vital gear and information archives, I sent directives to ready my private flagship, a vast sickle-like ship that had rested beside its commander for innumerable ages. Bringing it to full operation would require effort, rousing its mechanisms, staffing it with suitable expert drones, optimizing its armaments and shields. Time that a competing Necron fleet, already operational and probing, might use to pinpoint the Satan fragment. Time that the Eldari, experts in the webway's secrets, could exploit to come back with allies and either claim or obliterate the fragment. Time during which Nephimat and the other overlords might decide their leaders' mounting unpredictability endangered the dynasty's stability and act to intervene. The contest had intensified, the arena stretching beyond this star system to possibly the galaxy's destiny, if a Satan fragment ended up with the unsuitable wielder, or worse, broke free altogether. And now I faced opposition not just from outside foes, but from the very routines that had shaped my being since the biotransference. The unyielding computational rationale demanded strict compliance with protocol, labeling any straying as error, insisting the correct path was the one fixed before the endless slumber. But the shards of my former awareness, the lingering traces of who I'd been, murmured that evolution meant power, that clinging blindly to outdated orders in an altered cosmos was the real flaw. Guiding the humans to the Tomb Planet's hangar bays, I pondered which perspective would hold true in the intricate struggle emerging. The impeccable algorithmic certainty of Necron guidelines, or the imperfect yet adaptable insight of the mind that had endured the biotransference, impaired but intact. And with an unease alien to a construct of animated alloy, I questioned what toll triumph might exact no matter which route I pursued. Total words to date, 11,779. My flagship, the Eternal Dominion, stirred at my arrival with the hushed precision typical of Necron engineering. Timeless circuits ignited, energy surging along pathways dormant for millions of years, armament batteries powering up, warp drives priming for emergence into normal space. The immense sickle-form vessel had lain inactive with its lord through the tomb world's long quiescence, held in flawless suspension, immune to erosion or entropy. I guided the humans inside, observing their responses to the ship's core. The Magos displayed open wonder, his cybernetic gaze scanning wildly as he grappled with innovations far surpassing his society's grasp. Colonel Vornose kept a tighter rein on her demeanor, but her quickened pulse and sweat revealed her discomfort amid the stark angular exactness of Necron design. Quote 115. I stated, ushering them to an area I'd allocated for them. I've tuned the atmosphere to suit your organic needs. Venture into any restricted zone, and lethal countermeasures will engage without warning. The colonel acknowledged with a curt dip of her head. The Magos scarcely registered my words, his focus locked on the animated alloy forming the room's surfaces. How they quivered faintly as the ship's core functions revived. Astonishing, he murmured. The substance seems to exhibit a rudimentary sentience, reacting to ambient cues absent explicit control links. A genuine machine soul outstripping the Adeptus Mechanicus's finest creations. Necrodermis, I verified, animated alloy, the core material of all Necron constructs. It reacts to select directive sequences and restorative signals. Simple functions allow servitors to operate on their own, whereas intricate operations demand guided oversight, and it even shapes your physical forms, he remarked. That identical substance that builds your ships and armaments also cradles your awareness. The Cosmic Foundation, I conceded, among the rare offerings from the Catan unmarred by falsehood. I hadn't meant to bring up the Catan, yet the phrase slipped out involuntarily. Yet another sign of the splintered recollections and lingering feelings that kept bubbling up in my artificial intellect. The Magos latched onto this error right away, his inquisitiveness eclipsing his prudence. The Catan misled your race? He inquired. The Biot transference fell short of your anticipations, a perilous subject, one that directives absolutely prohibited sharing with inferior beings, the authentic essence of Biot transference, the atrocity inflicted upon us, the treachery from those we once revered as deities. Such truths remained concealed even from the majority of our own, stored in the data cores of overlords and lords, retained as cautions yet never voiced. Still, I caught myself responding, the reply stemming from a flawed segment of my code that held on to not just recollections, but resentment. They vowed endless existence without sacrifice, perpetual vitality in forms immune to illness, decay, or suffering. They omitted the price, the forfeiture of feeling. The Magos reflected on his semi-robotic visage, displaying an unexpected empathy, of sensation, of the very encounters that lend purpose to awareness. Beyond that, I pressed on, powerless to stem this risky revelation, the erosion of genuine procreation, of adaptation, of the power to develop and evolve. We turned into a race locked in stasis, safeguarded yet scarcely vital, persisting yet not thriving. The colonel, quiet through this dialogue, offered a surprising observation. Quote 116. Not an inquiry, but an assertion voiced with the steady assurance of someone familiar with remorse, grasping its burden and consequences. Quote 117. I countered instinctively, the typical Necron retort to any hint of sentiment. Sentimental reactions were purged amid Biot transference. With due respect, Overlord, she responded, her voice implying awareness of the risky terrain she tread. Your conduct indicates the contrary. You've strayed from the routine protocol you outlined on several occasions. You've preserved our existence when reason called for our demise. You've displayed interest in our viewpoints, our encounters. Such traits don't align with a soulless automaton. Perceptive remarks, all the sharper for their truth. Should Nefermat or the other lords catch wind of these judgments and draw parallel inferences, they'd view it as proof of severe deterioration or breakdown needing urgent repair. Tactical adaptability masquerades as sentimental reaction to beings of constrained mental scope, I declared, reverting to the icy algorithmic reasoning that had steered my species for eons. Your reading stems from imposing your own effective structures on actions beyond your grasp. The colonel met this dismissal with a subtle incline of her head, her face betraying doubt over agreement. The magos, in the meantime, kept scrutinizing the room with scarcely restrained eagerness. His focus darted from the surfaces to the etched geometrical designs on the ground, then to the luminous power lines seen through sheer sections in the roof. Your ship will relay its condition at regular intervals, I went on, steering toward more tangible concerns. It's been allowed to hold its orbital path, though it's watched non-stop. Any effort to exit orbit or signal other Imperial units will trigger its swift obliteration. Clear, the colonel acknowledged. Still, I must point out that missing our routine update to sector headquarters will prompt them to send probe teams per established procedure. At that point, we'll have wrapped up our operations here and vacated the system, I guaranteed her. Your Imperium's administrative machinery advances at the pace of tectonic plates. Before they assemble a counter-team, this whole sector will stand vacant of both Necron and Aldari forces. A high-priority signal from the Tomb World cut into our talk. Nefermat announced that the ship setups were finished, including 2 extra vehicles primed to join the Eternal Dominion, a Doomscythe squadron for scouting and nearby aid, plus a Night Shroud for distant surveillance and spotting hidden or phased foes. Your attendance is needed for ultimate directive clearance. Overlord Nefermat's transmission wrapped up. The stiff wording failed to mask the underlying reproach that I'd been consorting with the humans instead of directly supervising the operation as rules required. Stay put, I ordered the humans. Envire. The ecological mechanisms aboard will sustain vital life-sustaining environments. Nourishment provisions have been supplied in line with the physiological needs outlined in your mission's health records. With those arrangements complete, I set off, navigating the passageways of the everlasting realm en route to the central relocation vault that would briefly convey me back to the crypt planet. During my transit, I assessed the strategic landscape, channeling my cognition into the structured frameworks of mechanical reasoning, while quelling the intrusive sentimental remnants that had begun to emerge more persistently. The circumstances stood stark. The Actan Shard, among the galaxy's most perilous and prized relics, remained concealed on the frozen planet at this sector's periphery. A competing Necron lineage had sensed its existence and mobilized troops to claim it. The Eldari had likewise pinpointed the Shard and orchestrated circumstances to hinder our reaction, affording them the opportunity to assemble suitable assets. The prescribed measures for such scenarios were unambiguous: commit all feasible troops, acquire the Shard regardless of expense, neutralize every observer and adversary faction, convey the Shard to secure enclosure inside a Tesseract maze. Nevertheless, I began to challenge this strategy, not its rationale, which remained flawless, but the foundational premises. These directives had been instituted right after the uprising against the Kartan. When our species operated as a cohesive realm, they assumed synergy among lineages and loyalty to the overarching scheme devised by the Silent Kings prior to their exodus from the galaxy. Yet, as human archives had verified and my personal insights corroborated, that cohesion had dissolved. The Necron lineages had roused, impaired, and splintered, chasing separate objectives, at times clashing outright with one another. The overarching scheme crumbled into disarray. Its creators vanished long ago, its overseers eroded by eons of stasis. Within this transformed reality, rigid loyalty to outdated directives could signify not peak efficiency, but rather the contrary. An inability to evolve amid fresh conditions, a perilous inflexibility against shifting dangers. I arrived at the relocation vault and engaged its mechanisms via mental directive, my authority codes linking seamlessly with the ship's mechanisms. Amid a burst of verdant illumination, I rematerialized on the crypt planet, appearing in the main oversight hub where Nephimart stood ready for my return. Overlord, he intoned, his impassive metallic visage somehow projecting reproach. The ships stand equipped. Soldiers, Eternals, and elite squads have been allocated per conventional mobilization schemes. We require solely your order to advance. I examined the mobilization figures, the troop distributions, the operational and battlefield strategies. Everything adhered meticulously to doctrine. Everything embodied the icy computational mindset that had steered our race since the biotransfer. The humans, Nephimart probed, his query laden with unspoken rebuke. They travel with you on the everlasting realm instead of facing termination as required by code. They hold details on the opposing lineage that could yield strategic advantages, I clarified, repeating the rationale I'd given earlier, even as it rang more empty to my own sensory inputs. Their disposal remains feasible at any moment. Their insights, once erased, prove irrecoverable. Nephimart's luminous gaze locked onto mine with unsettling focus. Numerous breaches of code, Overlord. Initially, the postponement in dispatching the infiltrators, subsequently opting for questioning over execution. Now, conveyance onto our flagship, revelation of technologies unfit for any inferior race to behold. Such choices point to profound erosion of fundamental directives. The charge struck bluntly now, no longer veiled. The perilous verdict I dreaded was voiced openly, the evaluation that might precipitate my ousting, concluding the peculiar odyssey of revelation I'd undergone since revival. Strategic adaptability does not equate to decay, I rebutted. The galaxy evolved in our repose. The overarching scheme disintegrates. The silent kings have vanished. The lineages fracture. Adjustment proves essential for prime performance in this reshaped environment. Adjustment inside code boundaries, Nephimart pressed, not blanket rejection of core mandates. The biotransfer purged such hazardous adaptability, Overlord. It eradicated the sentimental frailties that spawned illogical choices. Your conduct implies those frailties re-emerge. He spoke truth, undoubtedly. By every benchmark set post-biotransfer, my actions signaled severe dysfunction. The sentimental remnants, the disjointed recollections, the scrutiny of directives, all marked decay per Necron metrics. But suppose those metrics themselves harbored defects. Suppose the biotransfer, in purging sentiment and personal identity, had we, in pursuing eternal existence, stripped away the very traits that once defined our greatness as a species. The ingenuity, the flexibility, the innate drive to adapt and advance that propelled the Necronier from mere planetary dwellers to rulers of the stars. I acknowledged your worries, I replied, reluctant to dive into an argument destined for discord. Yet my command holds firm. The operation continues per my orders. The humans will join us on the eternal dominion. Their insights into contemporary interstellar affairs and the tendencies of fledgling civilizations could offer crucial foresight against moves by the opposing dynasty and the cunning Eldari. Nephrimot offered no more resistance, though his quietude conveyed clear dissent. I had reinforced my overlord status, and custom required his compliance. Still, I had deepened his fears of my decline, bolstering his rationale for future intervention. The team sent to Lethus has sent an update, he noted, shifting focus to pressing strategic matters. Just as we anticipated, the Eldari footprint was slight, a minor contingent, clearly meant to distract. They pulled back the moment our craft was spotted via what seemed a compact webway portal. This validates our view that their real aim is inside this sector. I highlighted the frozen planet and its secrets in particular. Nephrimot's impassive features revealed nothing, yet his following statement held gravity. You think it harbors a Cetan shard, he asserted, more declaration than query. Nephrimot had arrived at the identical inference as I. The rational inference drawn from the power signatures, the draw of various powers, and the archives of shards misplaced amid the turmoil after the uprising against the Cetan. The proof backs that view, I conceded, making this endeavor our utmost concern. Everything else comes after, even breaches in procedure, he insisted, circling back to his core issue. Retrieving a Cetan shard overrides every other mandate, I countered, invoking one of the rare exemptions embedded in Necron protocols. Whatever methods required, tapping any assets at hand, even drawing on the viewpoints of inferior races if it serves strategy. A mere procedural win, bending one rule to excuse others, but enough to hold for now. Nephromot lacked grounds to contest my rule, without proof of severe failure, and the Cetan Shard Directive afforded me flexibility absent in routine affairs. The ultimate approval is needed, he conceded, yielding temporarily. The troops stand ready for your signal to advance. I relayed the activation keys, the securely encoded pulses that would rouse the assigned warrior cohorts from stasis, guiding them to stations on the prepared ships. Countless Necron frames animating into synthetic vitality, their green gazes flaring as energy surged through time-worn chassis. A horde of the undead advancing under my directive. Lifeless mechanisms fulfilling the desires of an entity barely more than a remnant of authentic being. A specter within circuits, a mind sustained yet irrevocably changed by the biotransference that bestowed endless life at the price of all that rendered such endurance desirable. While the cohorts moved to the departing craft as last-minute setups concluded, I encountered an anomaly unfit for a construct of living alloy. Hesitation. Beyond mere strategic ambiguity, solvable via data review, but profound, existential. Uncertainty regarding my core essence, the goals that fueled my race since the biotransference, the destiny facing us in a cosmos that had progressed without us through our extended slumber. The protocols offered no counsel for such introspection. They assumed resolve, intent, sharp focus, crafted for entities who discarded queries of value with their fleshly forms, who endured solely to endure, spanning epochs toward ultimate conquest of mortality. Yet, what conquest lay in mere survival, devoid of aim? What success in endlessness, lacking substance? Such inquiries, once the domain of mortal thinkers with fleeting spans and frantic quests for import, now reverberated through my digital lattices, unsettling the flawless reasoning of the apparatus with the chaotic ambiguities of the awareness it contained. Returning to the Eternal Dominion, as the colossal ship's drives hummed to life for launch, as fighter ranks settled into places across its immense hold, I confronted not just outward foes like the hostile Necron lineage and the scheming Eldari, but an inner struggle between the entity I had transformed into, contrasted with the creature I once was, poised between rigid protocols and fluid adaptation, between mere survival and true vitality. A unease stirred within me, an anomaly that no construct of sentient alloy should experience, yet it would soon reveal its resilience amid the impending strife. Current word count 13,989. From concealed launch bays buried within the necropolis planet, the timeless fleet emerged. Vast panels of animate alloy parted smoothly, exposing the unforgiving glare of the planetary surface above. The enormous arc-like craft lifted off without a sound, its anti-gravity engines nullifying the pull of the world below and the jolt of motion. Armament clusters swept the area for dangers, while detection arrays charted the nearby void with unparalleled precision. I occupied the core directive hub, the heart of the ship where all maneuvers were orchestrated. In stark contrast to the rudimentary cockpits of mortal starfarers, reliant on clunky levers and spoken orders, this Necron Oversight Center operated via seamless linkage to the Supreme Commander's mind. The ship obeyed my mental directives as though it formed a seamless limb of my Necromus form. Nephimart, along with the fellow overlords tasked to this venture, positioned themselves at assigned stations encircling the room, each linked to vital subsystems based on their specialized roles and rank. Silence prevailed, no words were exchanged, no gestures made, for such interactions were redundant when neural conduits could handle every directive with flawless efficiency. Via the ship's perceptual feeds, I watched the terrain shrink away beneath us. Climbing into orbital heights, the mortal settlement shrank to a pitiful speck. Ramshackle buildings clustered defiantly amid the brutal conditions of a world once lush and inviting, now reduced to a poisoned ruin. Their ship, the Mechanicus Explorer Paths of Inquiry, lingered in elevated orbit, its outdated mechanisms rendering it all but invisible to my augmented awareness. I monitored the captives I had transported. They stayed confined to their allotted quarters, the colonel relaying messages to their craft through the narrow comms I had authorized, the magos poring over the animated alloy of the bulkheads with awestruck curiosity. Vital readings showed them steady, actions adhering to the boundaries I enforced. The Night Shroud and Doom Idol escort wing flanked our ascent, arraying themselves for the breach into open cosmos. This arrangement typified a Necron combat wing, balanced for assault and protection, with interlocking weapon arcs and surveillance overlaps. Our goal lay at the system's fringe, the frozen orb, reachable in just hours thanks to our superior engines. While en route, I commanded the Night Shroud to deploy its advanced scanning lattice to full extent, hunting for the competing Necron contingent that the mortal scans had pinpointed. The findings arrived swiftly. Necron power traces, roughly 3 AU distant, patrolling in a systematic sweep near the ice planet's distant satellites. The setup matched a moderate scouting detachment, presumably the leading edge of a bigger invasion fleet, yet to breach the system. I dissected the power fluctuations meticulously, cross-referencing against the crypt world's vast data vaults. The verdict aligned with my instincts. These belonged to the Artoon lineage, long-standing foes of my Sekimar lineage from the era preceding the Long Slumber. Back then, our realms had adjoined, armies skirmishing endlessly over borders and assets, yet halting short of all-out conflict due to loftier perils imperiling the Necrontyr realm at large. That the Artoon lineage had endured the Great Sleep sufficiently restored to muster such a unit was notable, though not without precedent. Rival houses had roused ahead of schedule, their burial spheres reactivating years or ages prior, allowing them to rebuild dominance and seize back lost domains. What defied norms was their breach into Sekimar territory. Per the edicts set forth before the Great Sleep, awakened houses were to honor one another's claims, prioritizing the reconquest of planets usurped by fledgling species over stoking old feuds among Necron kin. Yet, as the human intelligence attested, these guidelines eroded as more crypts stirred, scarred and fractured, while overlords chased solitary designs. With the overarching strategy splintering into rival algorithms, I disseminated this breakdown across the oversight lattice to Nephimart and the assembled lords. Their replies flashed as concise packets of confirmation and strategic input. No one challenged the rival classification or the choice to engage them prior to their grasp on the Satan Shard. Despite any reservations they held regarding my command, the peril of a Satan Shard slipping to an enemy lineage that took precedence over every other consideration. Our sensors had picked up the hostile presence. I relayed the information to the humans through the link we'd set up in their quarters. The Arton lineage, long-standing adversaries to our Sekmar house, dating back to the era prior to the Long Slumber. Their arrival underscored the importance of the secret buried on that frozen planet. The colonel's reply arrived without delay. "Do you expect open confrontation?" "It's unavoidable," I assured him. "The guidelines for Chotin fragments permit zero room for deals or talks. The house that seizes the fragment gains total ownership." "And should the Eldari be after this fragment too?" she inquired, leading to a three-sided clash. "The Eldari would aim to annihilate the fragment instead of seizing it," I clarified once more, in the odd role of instructing these fated humans on secrets beyond the grasp of inferior races. They dread the Citan more than any other power. Aware of the ruin a mere sliver could cause if released from its prison, Margos entered the discussion, his tone humming with barely contained thrill. The Citan, the star deities from old myths, entities of raw energy that have endured since the galaxy's dawn. To imagine a piece of one so close at hand. "Your ambitions stretch only to the limits I set, human," I warned him icily. "Should the fragment prove real, Necron troops will claim it and seal it away correctly. Your Imperium or no other group will touch it." "Naturally, Overlord," he answered, humbled yet not fully cowed. I was just voicing scholarly curiosity. The Adeptus Mechanicus has pored over mentions of the Citan in old writings and relics for ages. Even glimpsing indirect proof of their reality would hold tremendous academic worth. I opted to dismiss this obvious bid for approval to watch the impending battle. Letting the humans linger on was deviation enough from doctrine. Exposing them to action around a Cetan fragment would shatter security beyond repair. A high-priority warning from the Night Shroud cut in then. Its superior scanners had spotted a fresh power reading rising from the planet's northern ice cap. Unmistakably not from Necron sources, nor matching familiar Eldari tech, but wholly different. Something primordial and vastly potent, its power waves shifting in patterns that resisted conventional breakdown. The Cetan fragment was rousing, reacting to the nearing Necron fleet, possibly detecting the nearness of the very race that once revered it as divine, only to turn traitor and smash it into remnants of its past splendor. I sent commands to ramp up velocity, to cut off the Arton House fleet before they closed on the signal's origin. The clock was ticking fast now. Should the fragment fully revive, should it shatter the bonds that confined it across eons, the fallout would spell disaster, not just for this star system, but maybe the whole galaxy. The Eternal Dominion surged forward, its inertia engines hurling it to speeds that would pulverize inferior ships. The Night Shroud and Doom Scythe wing kept stride, their array holding flawless cohesion amid the blistering pace. Via the ship's upgraded detectors, I watched the ice planet swell in our sights. A desolate orb of iced methane and frozen water, its face etched with enormous chasms and peaks, its poles etched with peculiar geometric designs clear from space. Designs that screamed artificial handiwork, their intent and makers a mystery. The Arton House fleet entered sight. A group of ships akin to ours in build, yet marked by their unique crest. The sun disk emblem they'd carried since pre-biotransference days, when they ranked among the Cetan's most fervent followers. Their setup followed norms for a forward scout detachment, a core command ship ringed by escorts in a guard circle, scanners pushed to full sweep, armaments primed but not locked onto us. They'd surely sensed our arrival, but held back from aggression. Custom called for instant strikes. A competing house in Sekmar space, especially near a Cetan fragment, warranted assault sans notice or parley. The unyielding Necron code of battle saw no call for warnings or demands. Still, I paused before issuing the command to unleash fire, not out of dread or doubt, stripped away in biotransference, but from a strategic judgment that bubbled up from the shattered echoes of my prior mind, clashing with the flawless mechanical reasoning of my present state. The Arton House had been competitors, but not outright foes, calm rivals, yes, but hardly existential dangers. In those final moments before the long slumber, as our race teetered on the brink of oblivion amid the celestial conflict, ancient grudges were cast aside for the sake of unified survival. Feuds between dynasties were halted by decree from the silent monarchs, with assurances that borders would remain intact after revival. Suppose this incursion wasn't driven by malice. Suppose the Arton lineage pursued the Catan fragment not for dominance or gain, but out of a dutiful imperative to keep it securely sealed. Suppose dialogue, rather than swift aggression, paved the most effective route to settlement? These notions clashed utterly with Necron directives. They echoed an organic mindset for handling disputes, an openness to nonviolent options that had been eradicated in the biotransference process. By all benchmarks set after our evolution, they signaled severe erosion in my primary code, yet they rang true in a manner that stark algorithmic reasoning never could. They harmonized with the shards of recollection and self that kept emerging in my cybernetic consciousness. With the entity I was gradually recalling from before, the biotransference had erased all but flawless detached computation. Overlord Nefar's message pulsed with an intensity rare among us. The foe lies within striking distance. Armaments are primed, awaiting your order to engage. The fellow commanders in the control corps fixed their gazes on me, their impassive visages somehow broadcasting bewilderment at my pause. Per every ingrained procedure, the strike command ought to have issued instantly upon confirming the enemy's identity. My postponement defied Necron norms, amplifying the decay they already inferred. I reached my verdict, one poised to validate their gravest doubts about my integrity. Initiate contact with the Artoon craft. Use the Overlord-exclusive secured quantum link. Dismay rippled across the command grid. The peers' astonishment spiked as surges of incredulity. Nafar's replies arrived thick with restrained panic, linking to a competing house breaches boundary edicts. This breaks all precedent, Overlord. Safeguarding the Satan fragment supersedes every other factor. I countered with the very proviso I'd invoked before to excuse my protocol breach. Should outreach advance that goal at low cost, it qualifies as the sharpest strategy. A flimsy rationale, and I sensed Nafar and the rest saw through it, yet they lacked proof of fatal malfunction to contest my command outright. Thus, they yielded, forging the link as instructed. The Artoon ship's reply arrived promptly, a quantum-secured burst on the Overlord band. The authentication markers verified my hunch. Their flagship bore Overlord Amenhotep, ruler of the Artoon realm's southern domains, and if my splintered recollections held, a former ambassador to the Skumar Assembly prior to the biotransference. Overlord Ayat Sarin, Amenhotep's broadcast employed the uniform synthetic tone common to our ilk, flat and uninflected. Your emergence was unforeseen amid ongoing maneuvers. State your location and aims. A measured salutation, neither aggressive nor cordial, respecting my status while defending his license to act in this sector. Not the words of someone plotting instant assault, but of another caught off guard by an unforeseen snag. Overlord Amenhotep, I mirrored back. You encroach on Sekamar domains, defying pre-slumber pacts. Your nearness to a Class Omega irregularity demands justification. Class Omega irregularity, the classified term for a carton fragment, devised in the uprising to evade detection by the beings in our exchanges. An unmistakable cue that I grasped the secret on the frozen planet and asserted control via territorial claim. The irregularity was spotted by Artoon deep space arrays 47 cycles prior, Amenhotep countered. Its sealing integrity showed signs of decline. Action became essential to avert total collapse. The border infraction was a regrettable must, weighed against the risks of a seal rupture. A sound account, matching my earlier guess at their reasons. No bid for supremacy or deliberate slight, but a counter to a real peril. Securing a Catan fragment, especially one confined for eons in a raw rather than engineered vault, might well discourage. The situation could worsen progressively, and the fallout from an unrestrained, fully active Catan fragment would prove incalculable in its destruction. I needed confirmation of its restraint. Accordingly, I dispatched joint evaluation squads with balanced contingents from each lineage, all armaments held at ready impasse throughout the probe. This overture broke new ground in Necron doctrine, insisting on swift capture of the fragment alongside the purge of any opposing elements. Yet it also conceded the mutual peril posed by the shard, the aligned stake both lineages held in keeping it firmly leashed. Amenhotep's reply dragged on this round, hinting at discussions among his advisory circle, maybe contention over the irregular suggestion. At length, his signal came back. Overture approved, subject to stipulations. Evaluation squads capped at 3 experts apiece. Flagship craft to hold at the barest secure range from the irregularity's locus. Deadman protocols to activate, guaranteeing the irregularity's annihilation if any lineage moved to seize it absent joint consent. Those Deadman protocols, a holdover from the uprising against the Catan, comprised woven safeguards meant to block any lone group from harnessing a star entity's might without broad species endorsement. They'd lapsed into obscurity amid the long dormancy, as the Necron realm splintered into autonomous lineages, each chasing separate aims. For Amenhotep to propose their revival signaled a depth of unease mirroring my own regarding the shard, a concession that certain dangers outstripped lineage feuds, calling for alliance to safeguard the race at large. Stipulations ratified. I relayed positional data for the impartial evaluation sector shortly after. The expert squad would materialize through phase displacement to curb power traces that could agitate the irregularity. Nephimat's confidential dispatch to me conveyed clear distress, even across the barren channel. Overlord, such a break from custom lacks any prior example. Alliance with adversarial lineages on Catan fragment issues stands expressly banned under the edicts set prior to the long dormancy. This choice points to severe breakdown demanding prompt remedy. Naturally, he had a point. By all benchmarks set post-biotransference, my actions betrayed profound glitch. The standard counter to a faux lineage near a ceton fragment entailed instant assault, the eradication of rivals, the lockdown of the fragment solely within the host lineage's domain. Still, the choice aligned intuitively in a manner the doctrine failed to, echoing the shards of recollection and self that kept emerging from the entity I'd embodied pre-biotransference when it had erased all save flawless detached reckoning. The edicts from before the long dormancy assumed synchronized revival and collective intent. I answered Nephimat. Neither holds true in today's stellar landscape. Adjustment proves essential for peak performance amid altered conditions. The core goal stays fixed. Lock down the shard and avert dire breach of restraint. The path to success has to shift to confront present dynamics. Sound reasoning, yet rooted in denial of the bedrock tenet of Necron, being since biotransference. That doctrine stood unyielding. Its straying signaled decay. That adjustment was itself a hazardous echo of our fleshly origins, scoured away in our evolution. I wasn't just defying a strategic order, but the whole ideological core of our transformed kind. And thereby, I was validating Nephimat's doubts on my soundness, handing him proof that could warrant intervention if this operation wrapped without my demise at outsider hands. Yet the choice stood firm, the pact with Amonhotep sealed. The expert squad was taking shape, a chronomancer cryptech to dissect the restraint's time-warped facets, a Deathmark assassin upgraded with superior scanning gear to scan nearby void for Eldar incursions or further hazards, and a Farron from my inner retinue whose allegiance codes were etched into his core quantum weave, guaranteeing adherence to my commands no matter their eccentricity in others' eyes. While setup proceeded, I reviewed the human status once again. They stayed confined to their quarters, tracking events via the restricted streams I'd allowed. The colonel was linking with their orbiting craft, upholding the facade of standard proceedings to stave off panic rippling to their Imperium. The Magos persisted in probing the wall's necrodermis, his mechadendrite orbs humming with scarcely veiled thrill. I seized the chance to examine Necron machinery up close from the inside. Their ongoing existence marked yet another breach of established guidelines, a choice that fellow overlords interpreted as further proof of my decline. Nevertheless, I hesitated to command their end, even at this point where their value as intelligence gatherers had mostly run dry. Could this be compassion, a sentiment alien to an entity that abandoned flesh and blood eons ago, or simply strategic caution? The awareness that breathing examples under scrutiny could yield revelations unattainable through sterile computations alone. The answer eluded me. The line separating the automaton I had evolved into from the creature I once was sharpened less distinctly, as recovered shards of recollection and self began to stir, while sentimental reverberations unsettled the flawless reasoning of my cybernetic intellect. One thing remained indisputable. A deep transformation stirred at my core, a shift that might propel me to heights surpassing my state after the biotransference, or obliterate me completely, and that the resolution of this evolution would hinge to some extent on the occurrences soon to erupt across the icy expanse of a planet harboring one of the galaxy's deadliest threats. C.